He's in our world now, and this time, there's no escape from the Mind Flayer. Experience the most terrifying moments of Netflix's Stranger Things Seasons 2 and 3 at the world's premiere Halloween event. It's Universal's Halloween Horror Nights. Select nights September 6th through November 2nd. Save up to $52 on select nights. Visit HalloweenHorrorNights.com. Online only. Restrictions apply. Not recommended for children under 13.
Welcome to On Trial, starring Mark Radulich, also starring Sean Comer. Hope you're ready, Hollywood, because you're on trial.
All rise. Court is now in session. This is On Trial, brought to you by the Radulich and Broadcasting Network. Judge Harry T. Stone is presiding. I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And tonight on the docket is the 1982 dark fantasy puppet movie, as it were, brought to you by Frank Oz and Jim Henson, The Dark Crystal, of which there is currently a prequel series, because all things are prequels and reboots now. That's the law. It came out of Hollywood. They've decided nothing original, all prequels and reboots. Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, which we did a review for right here on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network. You can check that out. Prosecuting tonight, he hates my whimper, but I'm just over here trying to be friend of the Gelfling. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Sean Comer.
Bring me goddamn essence of a Gelfling right now. I'm going to need it.
How's it going tonight, my friend?
Not bad. Not bad at all. Just been a busy day. It was interesting having my first ever full viewing of The Dark Crystal wedged into it.
You've never seen this before? You did not. This was not something you watched as a child?
No, but I had always heard, faintly horrified whispers of it.
See, you're going to have to flesh that out for me a little bit. I watched this as a kid, and I have fond memories of the Uru singing their song, and my uncle laughing and going, it's a barbershop quartet. I remember, you have wings. Of course I have wings. I don't have wings. Well, of course you don't. You're a boy. And the entire room just rolling their eyes and sighing. I remember watching this over and over and over again as a child, because we had it taped off of HBO. And I don't, look, I'm a world-renowned scaredy cat, but I never remember being particularly horrified by this. So tell me about these whispers you've heard.
Oh, just that it was pretty damn disturbing stuff for a movie supposedly aimed at kids. And as for the song of the Uru, my impression of it was that, this is the vocal manifestation of what a YouTube comment section would sound like if I could hear it, or the Twitch chat during an Overwatch League game. And yeah, as for the whole, you have wings. I don't have wings. I wonder, I just think that was like Jim Henson just trying to just for once wedge in a little bit of cheeky, like, gender or sexual humor in there.
Of course it was. I've always kind of assumed that was something of a menstruation joke of some kind. Of course we have wings. You don't have wings. You're a boy, because tampons. But I don't know. That was where my head went with it as an adult. As a child, I never really thought anything of it. But like I said, everybody in the room, every adult that was watching it with me was like, "Oh, for Pete's sake!" And I think,
now you can't tell me that at some point in your head you didn't hear your precocious little Miko Hughes just patiently explaining, boys have a penis, girls have a vagina.
You know, that's the age difference between us, because Kindergarten Cop did not nearly resonate with me as it did a generation of people ago. I think that was definitely your generation's thing. By the time Schwarzenegger makes Kindergarten Cop, I'm like, why aren't you killing people in movies anymore? What happened? So yeah, the Dark Crystal. Just real quick, I mean, you're going to go through your prosecution and all of that, but just as a casual film viewing, first time film viewing as a mid-30-year-old adult, 50 words or less. What'd you think?
The best way I can put it is visually, it's Jim Henson all over, and I mean that in the most complimentary sense. It is damn sure a Jim Henson creation. It actually holds up relatively well visually with just about everything else he's done. Narratively, it vacillates between over-explaining and almost patronizing the audience and just throwing shit out there with absolutely no explanation whatsoever. Things just happen. There is no world building. There's just, here is world. Enjoy!
So I showed it to my kids in preparation for this about a week ago. In fact, it was a week ago Friday. And now, this is family fun night on a Friday, and usually after a week of school, my wife is ready to hit the bar, and not because she wants to party, but because she wants to get drunk and die. But the kids are ready to party, and so they're a little rambunctious, and so getting them to sit down and watch dark high fantasy is a bit of a chore. But they got through it, and I will tell you that while you may have viewed it as an adult as patronizing and a bit, hitting you over the head, my kids are notorious for doing that Ellen thing of Ellen made a joke about this, about like watching a movie with somebody and them going, oh, what do you think's going to happen to this person? And Ellen turning them and going, you're watching the same movie as I am. Why don't we watch together and find out? They're very good about asking questions while the movie is going on that the movie will eventually get to. And I have to constantly tell them, like, watch the fucking movie already.
I'll tell you, this is arguably Jim Henson at his most ambitious.
Oh, absolutely.
And again, that is something that I could not mean in a more complimentary regard.
Yeah, this was like a passion project for Jim Henson.
Yeah.
Exploring what could be done with Muppets when
I
they're
mean,
not Muppets.
Don't get me wrong. You can never convince me that he hated working on the Muppets or on Sesame Street or anything of the kind. No, that would be absolutely fallacious to even try to claim. But at some point, everybody wants to kind of get out of their comfort zone and see what else they can do. That was what this was. He wanted to show that he could do something more than cutesy.
Here's what I'll kind of equate it to. This is what the Phantom Menace could have been if George Lucas would have accepted help, and people said no to him.
How in the blue fuck do you equate this with the Phantom Menace?
Here's how. So I've always kind of joked that the Phantom Menace is basically George Lucas's demo reel for CGI. But essentially the Phantom Menace is his sort of passion project of, hey, all the things I couldn't do with Star Wars in the 70s, I can do everything now. And by the same token, whether he acknowledged this or not, he was in a place where nobody would say no to him. He could just do whatever, and the Phantom Menace is a giant mess. But that's because there was no collaboration, there was no edit. But where I'm getting the equation from is this was him wanting to take a technology and wanting to take his fantasy, merging the two together and putting up his art. Same thing here with the Dark Crystal. This was Jim Henson wanting to see how far could he take puppetry and his fantasy and putting it up there. But the Dark Crystal succeeds because it's a collaboration of artists as opposed to one guy putting up his art and not having someone there to edit him. Do you follow me now?
Now, I will say this. I look forward to watching the prequel series because, again, I look forward to seeing this the story told in a way that doesn't entail gratuitous exposition dumping. This is exposition diarrhea.
Okay.
Is what this is. This is somebody fed the plot Chipotle, and this is just kind of what came out.
Well, just to sort of put some exclamation points on these various tangential conversations we're starting, and then move this forward. It is a kids movie, and I know you're famous on my network for having said, just because it's a kid movie doesn't mean it has to be stupid.
No.
And I think it does take a fine quill to get that line between patronizing and appropriate for a child. So the point that I was getting at before was, I think for an adult it tends to be a little over the top, but I think for a kid it's right at the level to where they can understand it and follow what's going on. In a strange and wonderful world is dark fantasy. I think if you don't have some of those exposition dumps, you'll lose your child audience, and this again wasn't intended for adults.
Well, there's having a few exposition dumps to make sure that, the littles get it.
Mm-hmm.
But, and then there's this being the Carlos Mencia of fantasy movies.
Okay. I'm sure some of this is in your prosecution, so let's put a pin in it. And why don't you tell us about your notes?
Okay, well, arguably the most interesting thing about the movie is that it comes from such a pastiche of influences. If you're to look at the visual aspects, you actually have to go clear back to 1975 or 76 or so, when Jim Henson glimpsed a Leonard B. Lubin illustration in a 1975 collected edition of Lewis Carroll's poetry. Specifically, he saw crocodiles just chilling in a palace and wearing a bunch of elaborate robes and jewelries, and you got to think that's where the Skeksis came from. Conceptually, the whole thing goes back to Henson's short-lived The Land of Gorge, which has no human characters on an entirely alien world. And he kind of combined these ideas into this 25-page short story called The Crystal, which, he banged out while he was snowed in at an airport hotel. And the whole goal of the thing, according to co-director Frank Oz, was that he was trying to harken back to Grimm's fairy tales because he really didn't want to live in a world where children grew up never being afraid of anything and never having to confront fear. Which I think is curiously thoughtful. It's not the kind of notion that we're sort of familiar with or accustomed to associating with Jim Henson. Initially, world was called Mithra. It's this really chill wooded place with talking mountains, animal plant hybrids, and boulders strolling about. The plot centered on this malevolent race called the Reptus group, which overcame the peaceful Unazi in a coup led by Malcolm the Wise, and the last survivor of the Unazi was Malcolm's son Brian, because that's a very fantasy sounding name, the Great Brian. Who had been adopted by the Bada, Mithra's mystical wizards. And elements of that draft made it into the final product. 2 funerals, 3 races, a quest, a female secondary character, a crystal, 2 races reunited during the Great Conjunction. Yeah, if you don't think I made a Schoolhouse Rock joke during the viewing of this movie. Um, you know, they they kind of swapped Mithra to just Thra because the original name was a little too similar to an ancient Persian deity. Kira was at one point called D. If you look at the philosophical undertones of the film, they were inspired by Seth Material by Jane Roberts. Henson was a big fan of the book Seth Speaks. He wanted it read by his collaborators prior to kind of beginning production on the film. One of them later wrote that Aughra's line, "He could be anywhere then," when Jen was told the Master was dead, was basically something that was all. I don't say it was a direct lift from Robert's material, but it kind of couldn't have come about without it. The Bada were renamed the Urs, which Henson would supposedly pronounce with this deep, resonant voice very slowly. I'm guessing the Urs, of course, were the ones that, as I said, long, droning, bellowing. They're the collective voice of YouTube commenters. Or Twitter wrestling fans. Go ahead, take a drink. I'll give you a half second. The spelling was eventually simplified to Uru, and then ultimately renamed the Mystics in the theatrical cut. The word Skeksis was supposed to be plural initially, with Skeksis, I think, being the singular form. That was kind of dropped fairly early on. The constructed language of the Skeksis was sort of based on ancient Egyptian, and with some hints of some Indo-European roots and influences in there as well. That was the initial plan anyway, but test screening audiences found all the closed captioning a bit too distracting. So that kind of idea of kind of having their own language was just dropped entirely. The Podling language is based on Serbo-Croatian dialects. Funny story about that. Audience members fluent in Russian, Polish, and other Slavic languages were able to pick out individual words, but not complete sentences. So it was kind of like how Nadsat, the slang in Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange, is kind of a mashup of Russified English. But yeah, that's kind of the big mashup of all of it. If you want to know roughly how well it did, it hit 858 theaters in North America on December 17th, 1982. Hey, which, by the way, fun fact, 15 days exactly after I was born. I was only 15 days old when this hit theaters. It really kind of mostly missed with audiences for a number of reasons, including, as we pointed out, parents being concerned about the whole thing's surprisingly dark tone, and it being a bit jarring for Jim Henson to be so associated with the family-friendly Muppets. And also, it was competing against two of the most beloved classic films ever made, Tootsie, which came out, I believe, the same weekend, and little movie you might have heard about called Et.
You're being funny.
I don't know. I've never heard of it. I mean, is it supposed to be like Mac and Me?
I feel like the word "et" is an abbreviation of sorts.
That's the joke.
Oh, you're a crazy guy. You got me. Put the cuffs on.
So, I mean, all things considered, I mean, let me kind of look back in my notes here. On a budget of $25 million, it grossed a combined $41.4 million when all was said and done. So, it managed to turn a profit, albeit not a spectacular one. It was 1982's 16th highest grossing film in North America. And it to this day is still one of the highest grossing puppet animated films of all time, particularly because it did so well in the States and not necessarily in the United Kingdom. In later years, it's become a bit of a cult favorite of fantasy fans and Jim Henson aficionados. Surprisingly, it's boasting a solid 78% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So it's, based on 45 reviews with an average of 6.43 out of 10. So I mean, it's pulling a solid C+. So it's not an utter bomb. Critically, I don't want to say it got drubbed. But much like my opinion of it, the belief was that the narrative doesn't quite live up to the visuals. Some might say it was kind of the Benicio del Toro, the Guillermo del Toro flick of its time. The New York Times described it as a watered-down J.R.R. Tolkien without charm as well as interest. Ouch. Whereas on the other hand, Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times absolutely loved it. He declared, and I quote, "Unlike many screen fantasies, The Dark Crystal casts its spell from its very first frames and proceeds so briskly that it's over before you realize it. You're left with the feeling that you have just awakened from a dream." That is quite the cleaning you are giving Jim Henson's cock there, and I'm not sure I agree with it. There's a lot you can praise, but that's a pretty gross exaggeration. And finally, we'll cover the awards scene real quick. It was nominated for a Best Visual Effects BAFTA. It won a Saturn Award for Best Fantasy Film. It was nominated for Best Special Effects at the Saturns. It took grand prize at the Avoryas Fantastic Film Festival and was nominated at the Hugo Awards for Best Dramatic Presentation. So, I don't know. While I debate how fondly it should be remembered, I can't deny that it had an influence on some people, and it was apparently thought highly enough that it merited a full Netflix prequel series. So, I don't know. What do you say you run this,
Hey, just a minor technical difficulty there, but I think we are moving and grooving. So Sean wrapped up the notes. Here's the 10-cent plot synopsis. We start 1,000 years ago on the planet Thra. The crystal broke, and the keepers of the crystal, who were the Urskeks, split into two different races. You have now some of this we covered on the on the TV party for Age of Resistance. I'm not going to go back and forth like we did there, where we're trying to sort of capture the whole history of this of this fantasy creation. As far as the movie tells us, there's an evil race and there's a good race. You have the Skeksis and you have the Urus, or otherwise known as the Mystics. And the Skeksis live in the Crystal Palace, and they are the keepers of the crystal. And the crystal has been giving them immortality. They are responsible for having killed off the Gelfling, though they missed one, and his name is Jen, and he's been raised in secret by the Mystics. The Great Conjunction is coming, though, and what we find out through, as Sean was saying before, lots of exposition, is that there is a prophecy, as we will learn, that a Gelfling who is our star here, our elf-like creature, Jen, will find the missing shard from the Dark Crystal, and as the Great Conjunction is happening, he will put the shard back in the place of the crystal. The Great Conjunction will happen, and he will save the planet from the Skeksis. However, if he misses the deadline, he can't get this thing fixed by the time of the Great Conjunction, the Skeksis will live forever, and they will rule forever, and the planet will eventually die because they've corrupted the whole darn thing. So Jen goes out and about. The first stop is the astronomer Aughra, and she is the keeper of the shard. When he shows up, she dumps an entire box of shards at his feet, and like the last crusade, says, go ahead and pick one, but choose wisely. After some time of studying the shards and trying to figure out how the hell he's supposed to do this, he plays the Song of the Planet, and the crystal responds, and he goes, oh, that's the right one. But right as this is happening, these beetle crab-like creatures, and called the Gartham, which we'll find out in a whole other thing, is a hybrid of Grunak and Spitters. I promised myself I wasn't going to keep referring to Age of Resistance. Never mind all that. But giant crab tanks named Gartham show up to Aughra's house.
Wait. So a quick point of order.
Yeah.
Because maybe I missed something during the movie, but do we find out actually during the damn movie what the hell the Gartham are?
Nope. They're just there.
I didn't fucking think so.
They're just there. All right, so the Gartham show up to Aughra's house, and being of large might but not a lot of brains, grab the wrong thing. They leave with Aughra, but Jen escapes. He shortly thereafter.
To give my fellow nerds some idea, these things look like a Metroid fucked a xenomorph.
Sure. We're going with crab beetles, but that also works. So anyway, Jen escapes, and this is where he goes into the swamp. He meets Kira, who is also another Gelfling. Her parents, just like Jen's, were killed by the Skeksis and the Gartham. They both equally think they were the last ones, but they have found each other. They then run into one of the Skeksis who has been ousted after losing a trial by stone. The Emperor has died. Two of the Skeksis battle for the right to be Emperor. The Gartham Master wins, and therefore the Chamberlain loses, and the Chamberlain is ousted. He is exiled from the Crystal Castle. So that leads to him running into Jen and Kira, and because he is Chamberlain and he is the Rasputin of the group, he is a manipulator. He tries to use his great charm and wit to win the trust of our Gelflings, except that he looks like a turkey vulture possessed by Satan. So they go, maybe you're not to be trusted, and run like hell. They will eventually find their way to the Crystal Castle. They try to get into like a basement exit where they run into our good friend the Chamberlain again. And he again tries to convince them to come with him so that he can get back in the good graces of the new emperor. Again, Turkey Devil. So they're like, nope, pass. He gets pissed, causes a cave-in, nearly kills Jen. At which point he grabs Kira and he takes her to the Skeksis, and they're like, oh, you found the last Gelfling. Hurrah. Now, we'll kill this one, and we won't have to worry about the prophecy being fulfilled. They try to use their essence draining machine on her, but Aughra is there, and Aughra says, hey, dum-dum, you can talk to animals. Try it. See what happens. So she does. And the animals all wake up in the scientist's lab where the machine is, and the animals break out of their cages, the scientist falls into the pit of lava, and Kira is rescued, who then in turn rescues Aughra. Jen digs himself out from the avalanche, and they all meet in the Chamber of the Crystal as the Great Conjunction is happening. Jen jumps on the crystal. Kira is stabbed to death, but in being stabbed, she chucks the shard at Jen. Jen grabs it, He fixes the crystal, the Great Conjunction happens, and look who shows up at the ta-da nick of time, but it's the fucking Mystics. Hot damn. Their entire contribution to the plot of this movie is they walk from yada yada. So they get there as the Great Conjunction is happening. They merge back with the Skeksis and become the Earth Skeks, who reveal the last bit of exposition, which is, hey, we were entrusted with this crystal, but we abused it, it split, we split, and shit happened. Sorry, we fucked up. And then they fuck off to space. Ta-da! The Dark Crystal, everybody. Oh, and magically, all the environmental damage that was done by the Skeksis is magically repaired, which I think is a sound political platform that someone should run on. If we want to fix the environment, clean the waters and the air, fix the crystal. I think someone could get elected president with that, but that's a whole other podcast. Sean, your prosecution, sir.
So let's go ahead and just work backwards, because the greatest weakness of this movie is the question, who the hell is this for? I mean, frankly, I'm not going to say that this is exactly Hellraiser or Saw in terms of squick factor, but in terms of things being just generally pretty unsettling for a movie for kids that would have been more familiar with Jim Henson's work from The Muppets or Sesame Street, this is really pretty dark the whole way through. I mean, and we're talking everything from the Skeksis devouring still living creatures at dinner to the scenes of the podlings and at one point almost Kira being drained of their essence and turned into pretty much mindless husks. This stuff is kind of nightmare fuel. And that's before we even get into the whole design of the Skeksis themselves. Before you even get into the very concept of these creatures drink the essence of living things to make themselves young. Those are really pretty horrific themes. But along the way, the fact is, visually, it is stunning. It is legitimately some of Jim Henson's most artful, imaginative, out-of-the-box work. I can't argue with that. Narratively, it is patronizing. It spends the movie pretty much taking the embodiment of the concept of show, don't tell, and fucks it repeatedly in the eye socket. It spends its first several minutes basically not being a movie, but a bedtime story. I mean, compare it, and granted, I know possibly apples and oranges, but stick with me here. Compare it, first of all, to Highlander. It takes less than 60 seconds of the dulcet, hear it, and you gonna get pregnant dulcet tones of Sean fucking Connery's voice to sum up the most general information you need to know. Kind of the same thing in Legend. Hell, Star Wars. You get an opening crawl of very general exposition, and then everything else is just laid out over the course of the movie. That's where the world building takes place. There's kind of a natural explanation of a lot of these things and a lot of the mysteries. Not the Dark fucking Crystal. It has exactly two speeds. I am going to tell you every single little thing you need to know over the next couple of minutes instead of letting you figure anything out for yourselves. And here's a thing. Look at thing. And nothing else. No telling you what thing is. No telling you why thing is. No telling what thing do. Just here. Thing. we have here is exposition in place of character development. That's where this suffers most, and unfortunately the greatest tragedy is because of that, we're not given a reason to give a flying fuck about what happens to any of these things. What happens to any of these characters? We're not given a reason to care. We're just kind of told why they exist. They're largely devoid of any personality. We don't really invest in them all that much. We're just kind of told why they're there. It's the equivalent of a modern video game tutorial. You know, my fellow gamers out there, if you ever played anything back in the nascent days of the NES, you weren't necessarily told how things work. You were kind of allowed to figure out for yourself. Latter day, you can kind of say the same thing about a lot of other games, like Silent Hill, Resident Evil. Best example is arguably the Soulsborne games, you know, the 3 Dark Souls games and Bloodborne. This is hand-holding. You know, this is the hand-holding of a helicopter parent. You know, this is pretty much the narrative equivalent to Eddie Kaspbrak's mom in It. And when we are introduced to new things, the other gears, as I said, concepts just sort of exist. You know, there's nothing to drive home why they're important. Just the characters know what they are. They fucking sure ain't gonna tell us. It is so bizarre to actually go through a movie knowing less than the characters do. To just kind of and there are extremes, and then there's kind of the happy medium. You know, there's watching Lord of the Rings, you're watching the Fellowship of the Rings. You get the prologue, you get the ring explained, and as you go along through the actions of characters, their reactions, and their dialogue, you learn more about Middle-earth. You don't learn anything. It's kind of the Krull problem. Krull does much of the same thing. You don't get much explained in Krull either. Just, here's the concept of fire mares. Oh, no, we're not going to tell you why they're important. Just, fire mares. And then we can kind of get into the nitpicking a little bit about the actual kind of way that the story progresses. First off, I just want to be known, the Skeksis defy all survival. All of it. When we start this thing, there are 10 of them. Minutes later, we're down to 9. Their entire species, as they know it, is down to 9 individuals. Okay? 9 individuals. 9 people. They then kick one out. Basically don't care if he shits, dies, or goes blind. Just bye. It's like watching a fight between white rhinos and pandas. But then, as it goes on, just scene after scene after scene kind of drags on without any apparent objective, without anything evident we're supposed to take away from it. The dinner scene with the Skeksis, it doesn't really convey all that much about them. It's not like they're, for the first several minutes of it, it's not like there's anything we're really taking away from it. Just, it's grub time. It's grub time for the Hell Vultures. And we're just kind of just sitting there awkwardly watching. But it's not like they're the only problem, because let's talk about Jen and Kira for just a hot second. Jen is a lazy, inept piece of shit.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Jen is carried throughout this entire movie by the actually brave, actually intelligent, actually talented Kira. Kira is the hero of the whole damn thing. Jen barely does shit. He's just kind of in the right place at the right time because prophecy say so. My God, Kira, honey, I hope they have Ben Gay on Thra because your back gotta be hurting carrying his ass. The last time I saw a carry job like this, Shawn Michaels went out in the main event of SummerSlam and wrestled himself for 30 minutes to make Hulk Hogan look like the legend he used to be. Take another big drink for that one.
I was going to say, point of order, take a drink, everyone.
Which, by the way, I have introduced Lady Jet Bear to professional wrestling. That is a match I have to show her at some point.
Oh, yeah, but I was suggesting liquored up first if I were her.
Suggest what?
Getting liquored up first.
That takes about a half glass of wine.
Fair enough. Cheap date.
And we got a case. So, basically, you could almost make the argument that Jen is a little bit of a Gary Stu. He gets to be the hero, but he never really earns it. Unless you count having to hang out with that screaming dust bunny, which, by the way, the happiest ending you could have come up with for the prequel series or this one, it would involve that thing being punted into the closest of those three suns.
Objection. Leave Fizzgig alone.
Fuck no, I'm not going to leave Fizzgig alone.
Leave Fizzgig alone. What did Fizzgig ever do to you?
That is Jim Henson's Jar Jar Binks.
Oh, I'm gonna shut up because you're in the middle of your thing, but it's not fair.
I ain't even gonna say he's an Ewok.
Ugh.
He's a fucking Gungan.
And not the smart one.
He's a bombad little nature. He's a bombad nature's little oopsie. But, you know, the one review said it's 90 minutes that's over before you know it. Oh, you feel every minute of it. Because while it's pretty to look at, again, it's 90 minutes in which you just don't care. And by the way, if I were Jen and Kira, and I were to see how quickly the Mystics just sang their droning non-song to the Metroidomorphs and just waltzed right in, I would be pissed. Gotta go underground, nearly get brainwashed and enslaved. Jen had rocks dropped on his fool head. Had to then, again, pal around with ah in his ears the whole goddamn time. Kira has to fucking die. Jen has to right place, right time, basically be, yay, I'm helping, and put the rock in the other rock. And meanwhile, the Mystics just stroll right through the front door. downright bullshit ending is bullshit. And by the way, as far as the prequel goes, I haven't watched it yet, but now watching it, I'm going to be fully aware that I'm going to be watching a series that is ultimately going to end in a genocide.
Yeah, Robert Winfrey said a number of times throughout that review, don't get too attached to the Gelfling.
No! Because again, it's a prequel. You know how this is going to end. All but 2 of that race is going bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.
But to kind of wrap up this first version of it, it's half of a full-fledged classic. Visually, it deserves every ounce of praise that it gets. But as far as the movie's actual structure, respecting its audience's intelligence, and not mistaking exposition for character development, it just couldn't miss the mark a whole lot worse. Floor is yours.
The charge brought against the Dark Crystal first is it was made without knowing what its audience was supposed to be. Was this a dark fantasy for young adults, older adults, children? As the prosecution said, who was this made for? And thus, the charge is it's a muddled picture because it has no defined audience. To that charge, I grew up in the 80s. 43 years old. You know what I grew up with? The Last fucking Unicorn. With that Rankin and Bass, I don't know who the hell they were trying to draw these cartoons for, animation. These are the good people who brought you The Hobbit and the Return of the King movie, which was on national television, broadcast.
Question. Did they also give us Heavy Metal?
Go ahead and look it up because I actually don't know the answer to that question.
I'm curious.
So yeah, Rankin and Bass, Last Unicorn, The Return of the King, and The Hobbit, which was all nightmare fuel. And I know because I had the fucking nightmares. Okay? These things range between unpleasant and gross to look at. With voice performances by people who sounded like Slayer, essentially. Okay? These were the most horrible, most scariest voice performances ever submitted to a cartoon format and put on for children. These were fucking children's cartoons. Oh, but okay, maybe you're not a child who was exposed to the Tolkien cartoons, or The Last Unicorn, where his skeleton is yelling in a horrifying voice, "Unicorn! Harold, unicorn!" Okay, it's still upsetting to me. With his red eyes. Who was this made for? I'll tell you who it was made for. It was the people like me who grew up in the 80s who had to deal with the Raggedy Ann and Andy cartoon. And remember that, people? Remember Greedy? This giant caramel monster who tried to eat Raggedy Ann and Andy because he had a sweet tooth? Remember that nightmare fuel? Remember Ha-Ha, or whatever the fuck his name was? The crazy-ass knight wearing a garbage can for some odd reason? Or the Pirates? You're my friend, I like you, I'm scared to death. Remember that? Remember the camel? The stuffed camel that the human character in the movie comes home with and becomes part of the group like Toy Story so many years later, except it goes fucking crazy and jumps off a cliff? Remember that? I do. I was there. Don't tell me who was this made for. Apparently in the 80s, what was animation and children's movies were meant to scare the fuck out of people. That's what they were there for. Don't tell me nothing. All right. The Secret of Nim. It's another good one. This is a story about rats over the dishes. Rats trying to kill one another with swords. This is a children's movie. We didn't get a break until Fievel. Got it? An American Tale. Finally. Pleasant-looking creatures drawn and singing wonderful songs. That was like the late 80s when people suddenly realized, hey, this shit's for children. Maybe we shouldn't scare the piss out of them. So don't tell me that The Dark Crystal wasn't supposed to be a children's movie. This was exactly who it was meant for. Little itty-bitty children who were used to seeing the most horrifying things not outside of a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. That's exactly what this was. The Skeksis look scary as shit and horrifying and cackle and are just nightmare fuel. That's right alongside everything else I saw as a kid growing up in the 80s. So you could throw that charge right out. The Dark Crystal, alongside Labyrinth, okay? Is there anything scarier as a child than David Bowie's cock coming at you in tight pants? I think not.
Objection. You leave David Bowie's dork out of this.
I will not. I had to put up with screaming...
Yes, definite objection over here.
You keep out of this.
Wait. Hun, are you objecting to me telling him not to talk about David Bowie's dick, or telling him indeed to not talk about David Bowie's dick? Which one?
Well, he's not as big as he looks.
Terrific.
We are not going into that on this podcast.
Sidebars down David Bowie's pants aside. Okay, I as a child had to sit through Skeksis, Rankin and Bass animation, scary shit in a Raggedy Ann movie, and David Bowie's dick. Okay, it's fine. It's all fine. We all got through it.
You sit through David Bowie's dick.
We all did. We're all sat in chairs and made to watch in the whole marathon of it.
Well, that's debatable.
Anyway.
I want you to imagine if that ever gets a 3D re-release.
Ugh, it's a dick right in your eye. Everyone's getting pirate eye. There's poor Jennifer Connelly wandering around a maze and David Bowie's dick right in your face.
I love that movie. That's one of my favorite movies in the world, but...
So, let's just throw the first charge out of it wasn't meant for children. It most certainly was, and it was appropriate for children in that age where we weren't such mamby-pambies about things, and we showed kids relatively scary stuff. It was fine. Most of us grew up to be, productive members of society. I don't know what happened after that. All right. So, to the charge, moving on from this. By the way, if you've listened to all of our on trials in the past, try to find the one where I don't make a dick joke. Good luck. All right, moving on. So, to the charge that narratively it's a series of exposition dumps. As I said at the start, I actually had the sort of thought experiment of having watched this with two modern-day children, an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. And while I'm not going to hold it against the prosecution that he did not have the opportunity to test this with other children to see how it would work, because that's not fair, I would say even if I hadn't watched it with them, just kind of putting myself in the mind of an adolescent, I would tell you, you do need to kind of take them by the hand and walk them along. Now,
closest I had was a 15-year-old.
I empathize with the position that you shouldn't have to dumb things down to make it palatable for children, but I think there's a fine line between dumbing it down and slowing it down enough so that a kid whose attention span is not always great gets what's going on and can process things. Remember, these are not adults. They do not, by nature, process things as fast as an adult, or as deeply as an adult. Even the kid with the best attention span is still going to have to take time and take it in. So I think Jim Henson and the person who wrote the screenplay, who is Dave Odell, and everybody else who worked on the craft of this movie, took care to understand who their audience was and what they would need to keep them invested. I think the problem is anyone who's watching this now as an adult isn't watching through the rosy glasses of nostalgia. It doesn't have that connection. It's easier to pick out some of the craft issues with the movie. And I respect that. But I think, again, and I've brought this up in previous On Trials before, you do have to understand who this is being aimed at and realize they're going to view the movie differently than the average adult. That's just the way it is. If you sit and watch an afternoon of Disney Junior, that's a pretty well-written television for the intended audience of 5-year-olds and younger. Vampirina, Vampirina is a fine little show. It's just written for a very young audience. Sophia the First, wonderful. It's not meant for a 35-year-old, though. You might have some patience issues with it. Moving on. You have to... Now, the prosecution didn't raise any issues with the aesthetic or the craft. So I will just go ahead and say we are in agreement. The movie looks pretty. As a demo reel for what you can do with puppetry, I think it's a masterclass. I don't think there's any objection there. So let's talk about characterization. Poor Jen. Poor Jen has had his name dragged through the mud in this trial by the prosecution. Because I think about the unwilling hero, right? The hero who was happy on the farm and is ousted from his comfortable surroundings and made to fight the good fight against his nature, against his personality, but because the situation wills it so. Why is Jen being given such a hard time when this is the paradigm for most of our beloved heroes? Jen is not a do-nothing. Jen was raised by mystics in isolation for fear he was going to get killed. And then suddenly, because they plumb ran out of time, was told, yeah, you got to get out there and do this. We probably should have told you sooner and prepared you. Sorry, we fucked up. We're the mystics. This is what we do. We also watched wholesale genocide happen because, we're a little Buddhist. It's fine. So, poor Jen, who has been raised in isolation, who has been protected all his life by this gang of mongoose lizards, or whatever the hell they are, the mystics, is now wholly unprepared to go on this quest. And the only instructions he's given is, go see Aughra. She's got the shard. And then when he gets there, Aughra's like, and I don't want to give too much away about the series, but Aughra knows what shard it is. She was there. And yet, she pulls this Yoda shit, where she's like, I'm just a crazy old lady, I don't know nothing. Here's a box of shards, knock yourself out. And he's made to find it. And with no help, with no instruction, just using his own cunning and his own thoughtfulness, figures out how to figure out which shard it is, and then does it. And then it's your typical high fantasy. I mean, if you think about, like, it was compared to Tolkien by one of the reviewers, but, not as good. That's a whole other conversation. But if you think about Frodo for a moment. Frodo's given this ring because he's not likely to try to take over the world with it. He's probably not going to wear it either. He's just going to hang on to it because, Bilbo's a lunatic at this point. And he's like, just take the ring. It's fine. Just hide it. Don't tell anyone about it. Okay, cool. And then, with no preparation and for no other reason than they've run the fuck out of time, he's told by an old man in a pointy hat, take this ring and go to a volcano, and we'll first go see the elves, and then eventually we'll be told, go to a volcano and throw it in there, quick. before the giant fiery devil eye finds you. And again, see, same thing. Jen, Frodo, same guy basically. They're just on the run. The cops got their gun, and right about now it's time for them to have some fun.
I almost want to concede the case just for that Beastie Boys reference.
So Frodo's on the run.
No, you don't.
So Frodo's on the run from the Nazgul. Jen's on the run from the Skeksis and the Gartham. Same plot. At this point,
Which one did it with the wiffle ball bat?
I believe it was Kira.
Oh my!
Moving on. To call Jen a do-nothing is to call Frodo a do-nothing, and he's one of our most beloved heroes. Frodo didn't want to go on this journey. He did so because he had to. You know, no, he's looking around and he's like, yeah, these motherfuckers are all going to kill each other before this is over. I don't particularly want to take over the world. I guess I'll go, is what happened. Jen is told, hey, you better do this or the Skeksis are going to rule forever and they'll probably find you and kill you. And he goes, well, I guess I ought to. And that's the thing. You look at Frodo, you look at Jen. If you want to nitpick about the finer aspects of their personality, but basically they're driven by the same thing: self-preservation. Neither one of them want to go; they just have to. And while Frodo struggles with self-doubt, struggles with his place in the world, I'm just a hobbit in a world full of tall people. You have Jen also struggling with self-doubt. Also struggling with his place in the world. I'm just a gelfling. All my people are dead. I don't know what's going on. But someone told me to stick this thing in a thing, so I guess I need to go. And then it's just your typical high fantasy chase. The Nazgul are chasing Frodo, the Gartham are chasing Jen, and eventually we get to where we need to go. And so when you get to the third act of the thing, it's just trying to get the thing into the thing with some hurdles in the way. That's fantasy, folks. I don't know how else to break it down. Jen is a perfectly adequate, enjoyable, charismatic, to a degree, resistant hero. Forced into circumstances beyond his control and a world much bigger than he is. Fantasy, ladies and gentlemen. It's like lesson 1 here. I will end by saying this. The Dark Crystal is a perfectly nice, perfectly lovely, dark fantasy children's film. If you're struggling with it, feel like because you're taking your adult stuff to the movie instead of accepting it for what it is and enjoying it at the level that it was made at. I believe, and this is why I'm going to go back to what I said at the intro of this podcast. The Dark Crystal succeeds where the Phantom Menace fails. The Dark Crystal is a collaboration among a bunch of artists with one, trying to create one person's vision. There are people in the room saying no when they have to in order to create the best picture possible for the intended audience, as opposed to the Phantom Menace, which was one person in the room creating a passion project with nobody brave enough to tell him no, and him creating this giant mess because the man needs editing. And we have said that about George Lucas a zillion times. The defense rests.
I really don't have just a whole lot to add, except that I will say this. I disagree strongly with comparing Jen to Frodo and Luke Skywalker, because those two proved to be pretty damn capable ultimately. And in fact, probably were all along. Again, right to the very end, Jen is just the guy who was in the place at the right time with the thing.
Hang on. I'll give you Luke Skywalker. He eventually will shoot some stormtroopers, and he has the fun idea to walk around the Death Star in the stormtrooper outfit. What does Frodo actually do? Not the Sam stuff, because it's Sam who ultimately gets Frodo out of a lot of the jams that he's in, and in a few cases, Gollum. What does Frodo actually do beyond carrying the burden of the magic hate ring?
I would say that actually counts for a lot, is his just having the will to not succumb to it, to keep going.
Okay. And so if you want to judge it on gradients, Frodo is maybe a better version of this type of hero than Jen. But again, levels?
You could almost make the argument that Jen is Morty to Kira's Rick.
Okay, then.
He's just and as long as we're referencing animated series, what the heck? We'll go with the kid from BoJack Horseman, the one voiced by Aaron Paul, who just say, "Yay, I'm helping."
All right, let me ask you a pointed question. Let's just have a conversation here.
Okay.
Are you just put off by the fact that there are these moments of internal dialogue that Jen expresses about why he has to do this, why it's got to be him, and he would have just rather have stayed with the Mystics?
Not really. That doesn't really put me off. Those are some of the few moments where he actually has a character. But again, most of the movie, what should be character development, is instead just becomes exposition.
Okay, what specifically about his character presentation is where you finally just sort of stopped and went, "You suck as a character"?
Just the fact that generally half the time in the movie he spends just kind of fumbling about, and it's Kira who actually ultimately has the solution, who has the level head. You know what? Okay, fine. I'll throw an even better one out here, and I'm preparing for the look that Lady Jet Bear just might shoot me sitting next to me. Jen is a half-assed Harry Potter. Kira is Hermione.
But we love Harry.
We love Harry, but you know what? As has been pointed out by a lot of Potterheads a whole lot more astute than me, Hermione does most of the work just keeping Harry and Ron from getting their dumb asses killed.
Well, isn't that just the world we live in? Well, isn't that just the world we live in, where we love the guy, but it's the girl that does all the work? See, this all fits.
Yeah.
Case dismissed. I win another one.
But I mean, yeah, we talked about the craft. We talked about how we ultimately agreed that it was spectacular. That's not really worth discussing anymore. But you know what? As far as tonally, you made the argument about Disney Junior. Is that the name of it?
Yes.
I'm raising a teenager. You're raising littles. I don't know these things.
Okay.
Okay. Did I get the name of it right? It's
Yeah.
Disney Junior.
Disney Junior is the channel in which the shows I referenced.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say the only Disney Channel I'm aware of is the Disney Channel I grew up on, and Disney XD is where Overwatch League gets shown for a few games per week.
Nope. There's like 47 Disney channels now. So the one for littles is Disney Junior.
Okay, I gotcha. Disney Junior equals Crumb Snatchers. Gotcha. Anyway, you know what though? There are also lots of kids shows that are not really geared towards adults at all that also just happen to just kind of still work for them. And again, I'm going to get shot a dirty look for this one, but I dare her to actually argue it. My Little Pony got over with adults more than it had any right to.
All right, if you're going to sit here and argue that the plot of The Dark Crystal is somehow less than the average plot of My Little Pony Friendship is fucking magic.
People obsess over it.
No, but you know what? It's one of those where it's also not a show where it necessarily, like I said, kind of demeans the audience's intelligence quite as much as The Dark Crystal does at times.
Oh, I would not agree with that. I've watched Friendship is Magic with my daughter. Yeesh.
I suffered through it with Alexis. Believe me, I know that of which I speak too.
Okay, if you're somehow for you, Friendship is Magic is like the Downton Abbey of cartoons. That's fine. I
didn't compare it to Downton Abbey. But I'm saying it holds to my point that the Dark Crystal did not need to basically set everything up, like every single little thing had to be explained. Again, it's the Carlos Mencia of fantasy movies.
Okay.
Except then it tries to it's like it overcorrects and then tries to introduce some concepts figuring, oh, well, audience will figure it out. No, and even in those cases, it wasn't necessarily even that we were confused. It's just that you didn't give us a reason to care. You didn't give us a reason to give a shit about what some of this stuff is. It's just kind of the Gartham. I'm glad we get some explanation in the prequel series because I wanted to know, what are these things? Why do they serve the Skeksis? Why do they look like a Metroid made humpity bumpity with a xenomorph? Are there Metroids and xenomorphs in this universe?
In the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies, was there a great deal of explanation as to why the Nazgul were what they were? I mean,
as a matter of fact, there was explanation.
Okay, the whole beginning
was explained.
Yeah, okay. In about a 45-minute session at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, you get the entire history of Middle Earth up until the point that we're starting.
And that was still more explanation than we got for some stuff in the Dark Crystal.
Well, see, I feel like you're asking for two diametric things here. It's like you're saying there's not enough exposition in some cases, and then like overboard exposition in other. And I'm like, nah. I respectfully disagree. I feel like there were certain things where there was enough inference there where you just like, they're bad, it's fine, and then other things that dealt with a degree of world building and quest explaining, so as to get the audience on board with the story they're telling.
See, it's like it tried world building, but just did it really badly.
And here's why I keep thinking George Lucas and Star Wars, because George Lucas had this whole like crazy world thought up in his head, and which apparently is a very common thing among artists in the 70s. Acid was flowing freely. And people just had wild and crazy imaginations.
And by it, we're going to assume you mean the cocaine.
Yeah, cocaine, acid, the whole 9 yards there. But my point, without making too many more jokes about it, is that I think, like, if you've ever sat down and, like, been with a buddy and be like, I have this really cool thing, and then you start to explain it, and it's just all over the place, and it's super creative, but it's really complex, and like you could tell like the more you talk about it, the more you're like losing people. And I think that's what happens with guys like Jim Henson and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg.
Forget the with a buddy. I've had to sit and explain my vague idea for a Fallout, BioShock, Mass Effect crossover fanfic to people. Hey, by the way, guys, on the bingo card, there you go. Mark that one off.
There you go.
That counts as a Mass Effect reference.
So if you think about all these like really great creative people who have these wide, expansive imaginations, and then the problem that George Lucas ran into, and that many of them run into, is the worlds that they've concocted. Tolkien, another really good example of this. The world that they've created is way too big for the medium in which they are trying to craft a marketable story. And so they got to whittle things down. What do I need? What don't I need? What can just be inferred? Some are more successful at it than others. If George Lucas had his way, do you know how different the Star Wars movie would have been? First of all, even the picture that was shot was different by the time they were done editing it than what was actually intended. Saved in editing is the phrase that always gets bandied about. But there's this happens a lot where you kind of just Patton Oswalt kind of made a joke about it, where you just storytellers just shoot footage after footage after footage after footage, and then an editor comes in and was like, "Let me see if I can make a movie out of this nonsense that you shot." And many So Rambo Part 5, as we're recording this, comes out tomorrow. And if you know the story of First Blood was an entirely different intended picture than what finally showed up in the movies.
I remember.
So, for the audience listening, I think, Jim Henson, and, if you're not satisfied with the narrative of this one, that's fine. Certainly Sean's got his issues with it. So let's use the word not, let's say you're not satisfied with his narrative. Jim Henson, let's say, struggled, and this team of artists struggled with trying to figure out how to take his vision and turn it into a marketable, palatable, easily digestible story, by the way, intended for 12 and under. It's not as easy as it sounds. So I think I tend to, with rose-colored nostalgia glasses and a connection to it as a child, admittedly, tend to be more forgiving of it than if I had seen it as, a 43-year-old adult and never having seen it before.
Well, I mean, and my case is basically wrapped up. So at this point, let's just devolve this down to just talking. This is one of the times when I'm not really doing shtick. Most of my opinions of the movie are pretty genuine.
Mm-hmm.
I loved looking at it. I was taken aback by just how gorgeous this thing was.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie, I'm genuinely excited to watch the prequel series because I get the feeling it's going to make a fuck ton more sense than the actual movie did.
On the subject of taking an artist's vision of a universe and trying to figure out the best medium, yeah, the bingeable 10-episode Netflix series seems to be the best motif for doing this thing because they really did a great job of fleshing this world out and letting things breathe and take time. And I think that's probably the big problem with The Dark Crystal is it's too much for a 90-minute kids picture.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, my thought was this would have made like a great anime or graphic novel.
There actually are Dark Crystal graphic novels and YA books.
Oh, really?
Yep. Found that out after the fact and after I'd already solidified Onslaught month for the month of September. So, hey, when Age of Resistance Season 2 comes out, guess what we're doing on source material?
But no, I mean, I get why this is so beloved. I do. It's just that, can I call it a patently good movie? It's the foundation of one, but, it's kind of a shame that so much had to be done with so much really brilliant world building that Jim did.
It's hard, If me and you, Sean, decide that we want to produce a fantasy story, you sit down and you start to knit together the rules of the universe. And then who lives in this universe? Well, where do they live in this universe? And how does this world work and all of that? And there's so much that you have to put into creatively before you even get to a narrative. And I think it is a struggle. I think it's an ongoing wrestling match between artists and, the people who are professionals at creating palatable, digestible material to figure out how you get from that process to something you can show an audience.
Well, and I mean, I'll be even more fair here with an example. And in fact, here's another one for the bingo cards, kids. The original Mass Effect trilogy has got actually some of the most absurdly, beautifully deep lore you have ever seen, and so much detail to the races, the planets, the historical events, the different factions that are at war with each other. Here's the kicker. A lot of even the weapons have and the weapons manufacturers have their own lore. Here's the kicker, though. To really get the best stuff, you have to hit the pause menu and you have to go into the journal section and listen to the different entries, which is worth it, in my opinion. But I have to remind myself sometimes, this is being done in an era when you can do that. When the Matrix sequels did get a midquel video game and a whole bunch of animated shorts to flesh out all the stuff that didn't make it into Reloaded and Revolutions. About the fact that, yeah, we've got the story of 2 Injustice video games, but holy hell are a lot of those plot holes filled in the comics. Same thing goes for Mortal Kombat. If you play Mortal Kombat 10, one of the most interesting stories they tease is the Outworld Civil War. You want to know more about it? You gotta pick up the comics. This was a time when they had the movie, and that was about it.
Yeah.
That was all you had. There were no tie-in TV shows. Sometimes, in some cases, you got tie-in comics that would expand on the story. And this was, I believe, when the Star Wars EU was a thing. And by the way, it's funny
82?
you mentioned the whole... Huh?
This movie comes out in 82, which I'm a little
when
confused.
when did Splinter of the Mind's Eye come out? Because that was where the EU began.
Oh, see, I think of the EU, I think of the Thrawn trilogy and everything that came after. So
No, the EU proper started with these
Splinter.
with Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Okay, well, that's close. That's close to when the movies come out.
Let's check this. Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Didn't even have to type the entire thing into Google. Yeah, okay, that came out in 77. But that's the exception, not the rule. And by the way, little side note, you mentioned George Lucas. There's also always the debate about, did he intend the whole implied initial incest thing between Luke and Leia?
Of course he didn't. This man's so full of shit, it's coming out of his ears.
Yeah, he himself has kind of gone back and forth between no, I didn't plan that far in advance, and kind of hinting at, yeah, I knew exactly what I was doing.
If you want to know what he really intended, read the, I was going to say it's Dark Horse who put it out. We did a source material on it. They did a comic book for George Lucas's original Star Wars script. And there's dudes punching girls in the face, and there's a lot of world building and confusion, and Chewbacca's not really Chewbacca. It's just a thing. Yeah, you can see where George Lucas, what he really intended by reading this comic. Then
there's him deciding that the genre of music that the Cantina band played was called jizz.
That's my favorite part of Star Wars. But
you heard it here first.
Well, first of all, I've always said what's
him some jizz.
you know what, I've always said Star Wars needed more of David Bowie's cock. I think we're done.
You're both 13-year-olds.
Hi-yo! All right. Well, this has been a fun discussion. We haven't really had one of these in a while where we've made our cases. Let's just have fun and talk. So
just often, this is fun.
Yeah. All right. What do you got going on these days, Sean?
All right. First off, coming out tomorrow at noon. After a couple days of having to juggle my schedule, I have the first blog on the relaunched comercodex.wordpress.com. It is going to be a catch-all blog for all of the stuff that I get tired of kind of shotgunning onto Twitter, knowing that for anything I decide to run off at the mouth about, there's going to be at least 3/4 of my following that either has no idea what I'm talking about or just doesn't care. Hey, speaking of which, one of the inspirations for this is my constant streaming. I am going to be running on a newly adjusted schedule starting this Monday over at twitch.tv/comercodex. That's COMERCODEX. Mondays are going to be known as Murder Mondays, where we are going to be playing a few hours of Dead by Daylight, probably followed by a few hours of whatever the hell Sean feels like playing. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, since I am currently training to try out for an organized Overwatch team sometime in early 2020, I'm going to be playing probably anywhere from 3 to 4 hours of competitive Overwatch. And we've decided that starting next week, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are going to be dedicated to either A, single-player games, or B, wildcard stuff from my library that I've just been dying to get to for a while just to kind of cleanse my palate. Again, that kicks off at 9 p.m. Central Time and usually culminates anywhere between about midnight and 1 a.m. or so, or just whenever my eyes start watering. Either or. One of my favorite reasons to promote my stream, though, is the fact that I really encourage followers to donate to my fundraising campaign for the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. That is a cause that has become extremely close to mine and my family's heart. I always tell people, if you want to send bits, donate, subscribe, hey, bless you, I appreciate the support, but please, whatever you're going to donate, especially since, cheap plug, this is September, and through the end of the month, Tier 1 $5 subs are half off, only $2.50 for the first month. Whatever you're going to chip in, please also kick whatever you can afford over to a worthy cause that I hope one day has no reason to exist any longer.
Very good. All right, so this has been Onslaught Month all month long here in the month of September. First 3 volumes have already dropped. This coming Monday drops Volume 4, the conclusion to the epic Marvel series Onslaught, which launched Heroes Reborn, which we'll talk about next year. Additionally, we've got TV parties for the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, and myself and Chris Bailey did a TV party for Clash of the Champions. If you haven't heard me just go all out, I don't give a shit, give this one a listen. I have some choice words about the New Day and what should happen to Roman Reigns when he cocks his hand. Again, 3 words: David Bowie's penis. Just listen, you'll understand. Speaking of which, coming this week, we've got we got a review for Rambo: Last Blood, Korn the Nothing, and then Robert Winfrey will be joining for yet another TV party, Disenchantment Season 2. We did not get a chance to do our review of the new Tarja album. I don't want to get off on a whole thing here. Just we had a leak in July. They fixed it, but they still had to redo the kitchen and redo the floors and paint. And they showed up yesterday to do that. So my house is a shambles, I tell you. But we have nice, pretty floors now, so that's good. In any case, we were not able to record the new Tarja review. So suffice it to say, if you like Tarja, you'll like the new album. It's fine. Check out our Metal Hammer of Doom extra on her Tears in the Rain, I believe it's called, video where she does roller derby. Yes, if you're tired of Tarja walking around in various outfits out in the woods or standing on a mountaintop or next to a waterfall, she does roller derby in this one, and a good time was had by all. We kick off October with Gotham by Gaslight the book, and then a TV party for the animated movie Gotham by Gaslight, which is currently on DC Universe. We've got a review of Hell Yeah, Welcome Home, and then myself, Totally 80s, Pat Mullen, Mr. Toxic Masculinity to You, and I and Jesse Starcher will be reviewing the new BH 90210, which has been hilarious if you're into meta stuff. And then we kick things off with the Killing Joke rebroadcast from source material. We'll have a review of Brian Azzarello's Joker, the Joker movie. That'll come out on October 4th. The new Steel Panther. Love Steel Panther. Hot damn. We'll have a review of Hell in the Cell. And because I twisted Jesse's arm into submission, we'll be reviewing the show Pennyworth, Season 1, on Thursday, October 10th. That's enough plugs for now, because if I go any further, I'm going to curse myself and we'll have to cancel half the shows. Because that's what happens. I plug a show, we don't end up doing it. That's how this goes. So
you plug a show and Podcoin goes tits up.
Yeah, don't. I had to break up with Podcoin. Before it broke up with me. It signaled. it signaled that it was coming to an end, and I immediately deleted all the things I downloaded, and then deleted the app, and then I cried and ate ice cream in a corner.
I gotta tell you, I'm a little bit heartbroken about that. I'm sorry that they couldn't keep it going because I genuinely love that whole concept.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't sell dick pills. I don't sell meals in boxes that they mail from you for some fucked off place. I sold Podcoin on this network. You know how heartbroken I am that it's gone now? It's the one product I believed in.
Yeah, it's always easier to sell something when you actually legitimately believe in it.
Yep. I don't know. Maybe I'll write to Conrad. I'm like, how do I get in on some of that Blue Chew money? Dick pills for everybody. All right. I'm sure everyone's tired of me saying dick. So for Sean Comer, our next. Before I go, I will say our next on trial will be October 17th. We'll be looking at the Keanu Reeves Constantine movie because we're dedicating an entire month to Constantine here in the month of October. And then on Halloween night, we will be doing an on trial for the original From Dusk Till Dawn. What do you think about that, Sean?
That's Halloween night?
Yep.
Oh, cool.
So we'll figure out who. I think you're prosecuting Constantine. I'll be defending, so we'll probably swap for From Dusk Till Dawn, which makes sense.
Oh, From Dusk Till Dawn is
sorry.
easy.
I have it the other way around. I'm prosecuting, you're defending Constantine, so if I'm prosecuting Constantine, I'll be defending From Dusk Till Dawn.
I have to prosecute but Salma Hayek has a snake.
And huge boobies. So what's your point? Do you want to prosecute?
It's a snake and boobs.
It is a snake.
I have to
and
prosecute
boobs.
that.
I will
Yeah,
prosecute
I can
both.
prosecute that.
You know good and well you don't want to prosecute that.
No.
I could, though.
Sean,
You could, but honey, you and I both know you don't want to prosecute that.
Hey, Sean, I will prosecute both.
Actually, yes, I do. That costume design was awful.
So Sean will be defending Keanu Reeves' Constantine, and
No, I will. I am up for the challenge of prosecuting From Dusk Till Dawn, despite the fact that Lady Jet Bear says that Satanica Pandemonium's costume design was awful.
All right, are you sure? I'm typing it into the schedule, so it is written.
Yes, sensei of scheduling. You may type that into the schedule.
All right.
I bite the bullet, and I will prosecute.
So you will be defending Constantine, and I will. Yeah, you will be defending Constantine, and then you will be prosecuting From Dusk Till Dawn. Fantastic, Lobster.
Yep, I am taking the hard. I am taking the hard road in both of these reviews.
Sounds great. All right, folks. For Sean. For Lady Jet Bear, who's off there in the in the jury seat, I guess. I don't know. This has been, I forget the names of things. This has been On Trial. Be well, be safe, and behave.
Dick.
He's in our world now, and this time, there's no escape from the Mind Flayer. Experience the most terrifying moments of Netflix's Stranger Things Seasons 2 and 3 at the world's premier Halloween event. It's Universal's Halloween Horror Nights. Select nights September 6th through November 2nd. Save up to $52 on select nights. Visit HalloweenHorrorNights.com. Online only. Restrictions apply. Not recommended for children under 13. He's in our world now, and this time, there's no escape from the Mind Flayer. Experience the most terrifying moments of Netflix's Stranger Things Seasons 2 and 3 at the world's premier Halloween event. It's Universal's Halloween Horror Nights. Select nights September 6th through November 2nd. Save up to $52 on select nights. Visit HalloweenHorrorNights.com. Online only. Restrictions apply. Not recommended for children under 13.